So welcome everyone. In case I am new to you, I'm Laura Barbens. I'm a newly elected, although not so newly elected, but newly in the office bishop. Welcome to our webinar. I am joined tonight by 3 people who are going to help bring, we hope, some clarity for those of you who are looking at having your remote congregational meetings. So first is Dr. Marilyn Mativia. She is the administrative assistant, which is such a puny little name for what she really does. But she is the administrative assistant to the bishop, and she is playing, well, Zoom God tonight. She'll be monitoring chat in case there's anything, posting things up, and also taking some notes if we need to have any notes taken. There's Marilyn. Also with us is John Sleesman. Mr. Sleesman is the treasurer of our synod, which is a volunteer position, but he is there more than the bishop is. So I have decreed that we're going to double his salary in the coming year. John is here not as treasurer, but also because he's just a whiz at parliamentarian things and constitutional things and things to do with Robert's rules. So that is his capacity tonight, and he's going to be speaking to those things. Pastor Chuck Canarum is also here tonight, and we have him on board because he has had 3 remote meetings already during the pandemic and has done them all on Zoom. So he's coming to you with some real practical kinds of information. We are going to record this meeting. So Marilyn, if you could hit the record. Oh, we are recording already. So if any of you, and we're going to pick our favorite recording from either this morning's session or this session to post so that people who couldn't make it to either one of these can still have access. That being said, if you do not want your face posted up, you will want to turn off your camera at this point in time. We are planning on speaking for about the next 20 minutes, and that's it. We're hoping to leave a bulk of this time for your questions. Most of the time when you're in a webinar or something, you are dissuaded from asking very particular questions about your specific situation. We're actually encouraging you to ask very specific questions. While we can cover lots of things tonight, one of the things that we cannot cover because we don't have a lawyerish person with us is any legal sorts of issues. We cannot give any legal advice tonight because none of us are qualified to give legal advice. So what we will do is, if you do have a particular legal question, we'll take down that question, and then we will take care of finding out the answer for you and getting back with you. Or if it has to, we'll get you in touch with a lawyer so that they can help you navigate any legal issues. Sometimes your constitutions have little quirks in them, and so we want to be as helpful as we can. So that's the layout for tonight. Again, mostly it's going to be question and answer. We will be done by 8 o'clock. Unless for some reason we get a bazillion questions. But with only 20 of you, besides the 4 of us on the call, I think that we'll be able to handle this fairly well. So the first part of our conversation is presentation from us. And before we get started with that, we want to start with a word of prayer. The Lord be with you.
And also with you.
Let us pray. Most holy God, this year, even though it seemed paused in the middle of March, continues to march on itself with one more thing after another that we have to learn that is new. And every time you open up avenues so that we can learn those things and move ahead, we give you thanks for the people gathered here tonight who are willing to learn and to ask questions, and for the people who bring their expertise to this space tonight. Send a spirit of collegiality, a spirit of hope, and a spirit of can-do attitude that indeed remote meetings are possible. Grant us grace with each other this evening. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. So I will reiterate, you can do this. I know that you can do it. So if any of you are feeling anxious about this, please put your hearts at ease, because I'm convinced that you can indeed hold a remote meeting. There are ways to do it, and ways to do it legally, and ways to do it without a lot of angst. And to help with that, I'm going to kick it to John Sleesman. Thank you very much, John.
Thank you, Bishop. Well, as the Bishop just said, there are ways of doing this, and there are people who have done it. We have found both at the synod level, ours and others, and at the congregational level, that everybody's situation is just slightly different. So there are going to be individual differences, but that's part of what we're here for, is to talk through some of those and help to identify things that may become issues. I'm going to be referring tonight to a couple of documents that are available on the Synod website. They've been there now for about a month. The first, and one that we're going to be screen sharing in a minute or two, is a document entitled Considerations for Electronic Meetings. That was revised on December 15th and comes from the Office of the Secretary of the ELCA. It was reviewed by the ELCA Legal Counsel. The reason we're going to be using that is it is in a question and answer format and has a number of specific references that I'll be highlighting. While we cannot offer legal advice, we can certainly quote legal documents and point you in some directions. The ELCA document obviously is a national document, so there is also on the Synod website a supplemental document that I prepared, which is Supplemental Considerations for Electronic Meetings. That's also a response piece to the ELCA document, which cites some specific provisions of the Ohio Revised Code for background reference, as well as some specific citations to Robert's Rules of Order. It's not comprehensive, and again, it recites points from the Ohio Revised Code, but we are not qualified to interpret what those statements say. So that'll get into discussion points and or getting legal advice. With that as background, I'd like to move on to the ELCA document on a screen share. So if I could ask Marilyn to get that up at this point. This is the ELCA document, which we've marked up a couple of particular paragraphs. I would urge you all to download this and review it before you have a meeting. But some of the points that I want to highlight just as we go through this quickly.
John, I'm just going to interrupt for 1 minute. For those of you who are curious where this document is, after we finish the screen share, Marilyn will put a link to where those documents are on our website. She'll put that link in the chat.
Okay. Thank you, Bishop. So first of all, on the first page of the ELCA document, the second question is, how do you do this under state laws? In Ohio, and the particular references to section 1702 of the Ohio Revised Code are in the supplemental document. Ohio is a state that unless there is a prohibition against it, you can't have an electronic meeting. In specific, many of our more recently updated congregational constitutions may have C1008, the second highlight on here, which is a explicit authorization to hold electronic meetings of a congregation. And the second part of that is also the equivalent reference, not highlighted, to council meetings. Sorry, it's been a long day. The last thing on the first page of this 3-page memo that I would like to cite is the question of, if you don't have those provisions, what can you do? And as discussed in the ELCA document, it goes to state law. Ohio 1702.01, section Q, if you want to be precise, and the supplemental document is quoted, and that appears to support the definition that you can have such a meeting, even if you don't have a specific provision. The reason I do have to say appears is that interpreting that language is a legal issue, and therefore the official interpretation of an Ohio document has to come from somebody who is a lawyer, authorized attorney in the state of Ohio. Probably one of the most important things is the first question on the second page of this document, because it says a valid electronic meeting requires that there be simultaneous oral communication. That is, everyone must be able to hear and speak with two-way communications possible. That does mean that there has to be some technology involved in a remote meeting. That could be Zoom, it could be various other methods that we can discuss a little bit later. But you do have to have the ability to have simultaneous discussion for questions like amendments or raising issues, making debate points. If we scroll down a bit further on this page, the next highlight does talk about questions that get into requirements that are in our constitutional documents. We require that voting members must be generally confirmed, must have contributed and communed in the current or preceding year. With the COVID issues, communing may not have been possible. This document from the ELCA indicates that because of that, we as the ELCA should excuse the communion requirement. This again, and this gets into the legal side of things, may or may not apply to the governing documents and may also allow certain other provisions to be waived, but that is a legal issue. The rest of this page talks about special rules of procedure. I'm not going to go through that, but some of it's there. You may or may not need special rules for that, and I've made some references in the supplemental document to some issues that are raised in Robert's rules. I should also note, our constitutions normally require that we follow the latest edition of Robert's Rules of Order. The latest edition actually is the 14th edition, which just came out the 1st of September of this year. I'm sorry, the 12th edition, which just came out in September of this year. You will note it if you actually get one because it's a white cover. They cycle through different covers with each edition so that you can identify it. This one is particularly of some note because it has much more information about electronic meetings and remote voting methods. In particular, something that I know has been an issue in many congregations is the question of voting by mail. There are now almost 10 pages in Robert's Rules relating to things like mail ballots. So this time around, it may be worth, if these are issues in your congregation, either getting a copy out of a library or investing some money to have one around, as opposed to what many people do, which is to use an older document or a short form document. The final thing I would like to note on the ELCA document is the issue that gets raised. Oh, okay, I should note this. I talked about voting. Much of the third page of the ELCA document does talk about a number of voting methods. And for the moment, let me just indicate that's there. And that, again, I would commend reading through this document from the ELCA website for more information. Marilyn, if you can scroll down, then the last thing in the ELCA document that I would note is the question of what happens with postponing an annual meeting. This document cites specifically the budget issues. Again, in particular situations, there may be other issues in particular congregations that could also be affected, that without a meeting, a congregation could not renew or perform. With that, I'll ask Marilyn to end the screen share. We're going to move on a little bit more to some practical issues. We do have Pastor Knierim with us tonight, who, as the bishop indicated, his congregation, First Strongsville, has already had 3 Zoom meetings in one form or another. So he probably has the most experience, although, as he pointed out this morning, the most experience does not necessarily mean he has the best experience.
Right.
But at this point in time, I'm going to turn the congregation or the meeting over to him to talk about some of the practical issues that they had to face, both on the technology side and in the issue of how they could deal with members who were not able to get into the space.
Thanks,
Pastor?
John. Thanks, John. Good evening, everybody. It's nice to be with you. I'll just start by saying that the reason that we've had 3 Zoom meetings or had 3 Zoom meetings in 2020 is that, first of all, our Constitution calls for 2 separate congregational meetings during the course of the year. One in the spring to elect council members and endowment committee members, and also to have an open agenda. And then one in the fall, in the late fall, to approve the budget for the coming year. The reason that we had 3 meetings in 2020 is that we were also in the midst of refinancing our mortgage, and then the pandemic hit, and we had to make some decisions rather quickly in order to close up that process. So actually the mortgage refi meeting was the very first time that we used Zoom. You know, our dilemma at First in Strongsville was probably similar, if not exactly the same to most of yours, and that's what is the most effective or efficient way to conduct a congregational meeting in the midst of a pandemic that doesn't allow us to meet safely in person, while, of course, also maintaining our constitutional obligations. So it's a rather complicated thing. And I'll just say that the first person I called was John Sleesman, and he was really instrumental and helpful in guiding us to a way that we could make this thing work. And maybe our Constitution, maybe yours also, does not allow voting by proxy or absentee ballot. And I'll just let you know that our quorum number is 50, which may be a little higher than some of you, and is sometimes a challenge to reach. One of the questions that we wrestled with mightily, I would say, is that, was there a way to conduct a congregational meeting without excluding anyone? We couldn't answer that question in the affirmative. There was no way that we could conduct. The quacking that you hear in the background is my dog playing with a toy, so I apologize for that. I would mute under other circumstances. Anyway, there was really no way for us to conduct a congregational meeting without excluding someone, because even given the demographic in our congregation, where we have a large number of people who are familiar with not only Zoom, but other technology that allows for meetings like this, we still have some folks who either don't have access to a computer at all, or are really uncomfortable or unfamiliar with a Zoom setting like this. And so that's one of the things really I think that the bishop wanted me to emphasize tonight, that there's no matter which way we decide to hold a congregational meeting, it's inevitable that we're going to exclude some segment, hopefully small segment of the congregation. And I think the bishop may also, you may expand on this later, right, Bishop, that no matter whether we're in person or not in person, we've always excluded some folks just by the nature of the beast. So I'll let her comment on that later. But so anyway, we chose the Zoom platform, and that's what I'm going to talk about specifically tonight. There, as John mentioned, there are other meeting platforms like this available, and you may choose to use one of those or none of them at all. But so I just want to kind of walk you through the procedure that we used in order to set up our Zoom meeting and then conduct it each time. So the first thing we did, our Constitution requires us to notify the congregation, typically by mail, but we've also used electronic means, email, to notify folks of congregational meetings in a certain time in advance. I think it's 2 weeks, actually, might be 3 weeks. Anyway, we did notify every member of the congregation either by letter or by email. And in that communication, we not only included the Zoom link for the congregational meeting, but we provided some instruction as well, so that when people did log in, they knew exactly what was expected of them and how the meeting would hopefully anyway proceed. And so this became our official notification to the congregation in accordance with our Constitution. So what we asked of people when they did log in, and remember, just for an example, for our meeting, our first meeting where we were voting on a refinancing of our mortgage, we had about 80 folks in our meeting. And so that was it was at least 3, maybe 4 screens worth of people. And they were all kind of flooding in right around the appointed meeting time. And so we asked in advance and reminded people also as they came on board to use the chat feature to sign into the meeting. And it was helpful not only for our council secretary to keep track of and record everyone who was present, but it was also a great way to identify everyone who was in a single window, because obviously, we had spouses, husbands and wives in meetings. We had husbands, wives, and confirmed young people in our meetings. And so it was a way to know who exactly was in each window and how many people we actually had. When we were ready to start the meeting, our council secretary just took a moment or two to review the list of folks that she had already recorded and made sure that she didn't miss anybody. And if she did, those folks were added. It was a way, obviously, also for us to know that we had a quorum present and could conduct business. Then as the meeting began, we asked everybody to mute themselves with the exception of the person who was actually leading the meeting. And in our case, that was either the council president or the treasurer or the chair of the stewardship committee. So those three folks kind of had open access. And so we walked through the agenda. Whatever the purpose of the meeting was, we walked through that. And then when we opened it for conversation and discussion, we asked people to use that raise hand feature that's probably on the bottom of your screen right now. It's on the bottom of mine anyway. So if they would just click that raise hand feature, we would scroll through the pages, and the person who was leading the meeting would call on that person. They would unmute themselves. Discussion would take place. And that really worked well, I would say, to keep the meeting orderly. I think it actually worked better than in-person meetings, where sometimes people are scrambling for the microphone or want to or can't hear one another, that kind of thing. And so it worked really, really well. The other thing that I'd want to touch on is how we voted in these electronic meetings. We did not use the raise hand feature for voting, nor did we use just kind of the manual raising of your hand for voting either, because especially when we're voting on financial issues, people want to maintain their privacy, and we're accustomed to providing paper ballots for those kinds of things. So we use the polling feature on Zoom, and I don't know how many of you are familiar with that, but it's something that has to be set up in advance of the meeting. And it's fairly simple to use. So the administrator, the leader of the meeting, whoever's setting the meeting up would activate that polling feature on the meeting setup page, and then design the poll or the question however he or she would like to. For us, it was pretty simple. And again, I'll just use the budget proposal as an example. We just set up a question or a statement, approve the 2021 budget proposal. And then there were just two choices, yes or no, and people checked that. We activated the polling feature when it was time to vote. People checked yes or no, and results were tabulated very, very quickly. We made sure that everybody had an opportunity to vote. We didn't close it out real quick, but and we matched the number of votes against the number of people recorded at the beginning of the meeting. That seemed to work pretty well. It got a little tricky when we were electing people to positions, council positions and endowment positions. We had to have a number of boxes. I think we elected 6 people total, so it got a little cumbersome. But again, we couldn't think of a different way to do it, so we just flew with it. And I guess one thing that I think I wish that we would have done, perhaps, and this came up at the morning meeting, one thing that I wish we would have done that I would encourage all of you to do would be to rehearse a meeting. Just set up a mock meeting with certain individuals, and then walk through exactly what you would do at the congregational meeting so you can work out any kinks. We scrambled a little bit a couple times at our meetings, and it was uncomfortable for me because I was the one who set up the meeting. And but I would, and just in retrospect, I would rehearse. Okay, so that's kind of what we did in a nutshell. And John, I'm gonna toss this back to you. I know you have just a small piece to go before we go back to Bishop Arbans.
Thank you, Chuck. I just wanted to briefly remind everybody, Zoom is a good platform. It's not perfect. There are several others out there. Each has strengths and weaknesses. Zoom, the biggest advantage of Zoom right now is that because it was out there promptly back in February, March, everybody's familiar with it. But there are some others that have strengths that are weaknesses in Zoom. So if you have access to them, it's not the only platform. Also, we've been focusing this year on higher tech video platforms, but for some smaller congregations, an old-fashioned conference call setup through an audio bridge may be a easier possibility. Again, some of this comes into voting methods. One of the issues with how to vote is that traditionally you can, with some requirements for privacy, do stuff by mail, but that has become a problem in the last couple of months. So these are all issues that are fluid. Again, I would call your attention to something I said back at the beginning. We're all in this together. We've been learning over the last 6-9 months, both at the synod and at the congregational level. So it's share the advice and ask for some help when it comes up. With that encouragement, I don't have anything else to say, which for people who know me know that's pretty far down the list. But at this point, I would turn things back over to Bishop Arbans.
So I would just like to reiterate, if we can pull off a remote synod assembly and actually elect a bishop, I think that it's possible for you to have your congregational meetings. And so I really do think that at this point, what we want to do is answer your questions. So as you're ready to ask a question, just unmute yourself. I see that Pastor Jesse has already unmuted himself, so perhaps he is ready to speak already.
I am ready, Bishop. My question is, how can you poll when there may be more than one voting member in a household?
Good question.
Yeah, that's a really great question. What we did was when we, are you familiar at all with the polling feature?
Actually, I'm not.
Okay.
So that may be my problem.
No, it's not a problem. I just didn't want to reiterate information that you already knew. So what we did was we allowed, when I went into the polling feature to set it up, you can, for example, and I'll just use the budget proposal example again. Approve the 2021 budget. Yes, no. You can add I think up to 10 responses for each polling question or statement. So we put probably we probably at least 4. We allowed for 4 in each window, thinking that we probably wouldn't exceed 4 people in each window. So we just went yes, no, yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. And so that every person in the window then could vote yes or no. Does that make sense?
I see how it's a possibility.
Okay.
I suppose it could be argued that it's open to fraud. The counter argument would be we're the church, but
yeah, right. I think the safeguard against that is that we know already how many people we have in the meeting. And if the number of votes exceed the number of people at the meeting, then we know we've got a problem.
I hear you. I think that's right.
Yeah, I think that's one of those things that I think falls into the gray area. It really should be very, very closely monitored, and it's not 100% secure. But at the same time, quite honestly, in most of our cases, there just aren't a lot of people that are in tremendous contention over being elected to our consuls that there's a chance that we're going to be stuffing ballot boxes.
All right.
So
I have another question, if I might.
You not only might you, but you may.
Okay. Pastor Knierim, did you have a dais present? Like, was there a single like lectern podium that your camera was focused on, so that it sort of felt like a regular meeting and people came and went? Or did it look kind of like what we're looking at right now?
It looked pretty much like it looks right now, but that idea is intriguing.
And did you have any did you have any people physically present at the meeting site? Like, was it a combination live in-person meeting in the sanctuary plus people could come in? No, it was not.
No, it wasn't. It was just like this, but I think the bishop did at least one or two what we call hybrid meetings. So
yeah, Mr. Goldsworth, would you like to talk about how our hybrid how celebrations? I have to break old habits. How celebrations hybrid meeting?
Well, at the time, Pastor Laura put together the meeting, and what we did was we had it was when we were still doing outside worship, and we had some participants there at the church, and then we had myself and any of the people that were online zoomed in. The problem we did run into was that we had a little bandwidth problem, that Pastor Laura was on her computer. I'm sorry I keep calling you Pastor Laura, but after 20 years, it's a bad habit. And Bishop Barbin's.
It was probably a bad habit, 20 years ago too.
Yeah, well, whatever. Anyway, it worked out. We just had a bandwidth problem because not only was I trying to use my computer, Pastor Laura was using her computer, but we had some participants that were even there thought they should get online so they could make sure we were doing it right. So other than that, it worked out just fine. I have a really unintelligent question. I'm looking at my screen. Where does the raise hand feature come in? How do I get that up on my screen?
it's a great
It's
question.
not on my screen right now.
Really?
if you open the participant window by clicking on participants down at the bottom,
Okay.
down at the bottom, there's some invite, mute me, raise hand options.
Okay, and everybody that's at the meeting's name is listed here also.
Yes. Now,
Okay.
that's if you are on a desktop or tablet. I'm sorry, if you're on a desktop or laptop.
Right.
If you are on a tablet, the display may be different.
Okay, all right, thank you very much. Well, that's the way we did it. It worked out fine. Any other comments? Bishop?
We actually also at Advent Solon had a hybrid meeting during that time when you were allowed to have people in your worship space. We held that in a more traditional fashion. We do have video equipment with a couple of cameras and some reasonably high-speed internet. So we had a number of people spaced around the sanctuary who were there live, most of us on Zoom, but that did give us the ability to have more of the traditional feel with a camera focused on the pulpit as the lectern or podium. Again, that does require more bandwidth. So that can be an issue in some congregations, depending on what your internet connection speeds are.
Pastor Jesse, did that answer, did all those different people answer your questions?
Yes, I intend to host, I guess what we're going to call a hybrid meeting. And so I think what we're going to try to do is set up a dais kind of effect so that it feels regular. I'm not exactly sure that's going to be easy, but I'm going to work on it. I do have one more question / comment, and I think what I understand is that the bishop was going to answer this anyway, but the first question and answer on page 2 of the ELCA document says that every person has to be available. We are certainly not going to do that. That's not going to happen.
So, yeah, so one of the things that Synod Council struggled with when we were talking about having a remote Synod assembly was, what about the people who don't have the technology? And our watershed moment was when we realized that we've always left people out because anybody who had mobility issues coming to the night center could have been very difficult. So those people never really had access to be voting members at the Synod Assembly. And the same is true about our congregational meetings. Those homebound people have never had access to our congregational meetings, which isn't something we've often thought about. But we've always excluded them, because if you can't make it to the building, then you can't be at our meeting. Well, now the transportation, this is something John Sleesman brought up regarding the assembly. Now the transportation is just different, and yet the result is the same. There are some people who just don't have the transportation to get to our meetings. It's not it's not something that we like to admit, but it's there. It's always been there.
I think one thing we haven't talked about is the need for passcode, so you can make sure that you've got your members coming to your meetings so you don't get hacked.
Yeah, and Zoom now absolutely requires that. You have to have one or the other safe guards, and one is you either have to have a waiting room or you have to have a passcode. So yeah, good. Other questions? Lots of people on the call, so other questions? Mr. Goldsworth is still unmuted. Does that mean you have another question? Oh, no, no.
I have a question.
Yes, please.
I'm Dan Zranek from Parma Lutheran Church. The question is about the polling feature for voting. Our congregation is having a sort of hybrid meeting this coming Sunday. So the meeting was already set up and, advertised, and the codes went out. And I don't think it was set up for polling. Is that something that can be added to that meeting later,
Yes.
or does it have to be done at the outset?
Yes, it absolutely can. You can go into your administrative settings in Zoom and just pull up that meeting, and you can add a poll to the meeting. It's kind of down at the very bottom of the page, if I remember correctly. You can add the polling feature, and you can set up the poll in advance. I wouldn't suggest that you try to do it while the meeting is happening, but you can definitely edit your meeting and set it up before your meeting is this weekend.
Do you have to call those polls up then when you're doing the voting? Do you say,
Yes.
okay, we have a motion, and then the person running the meeting then calls up that poll?
Yeah,
Yes.
yes, that's
And
absolutely right.
Actually, one of the things you have to think about in preparing for that is if you've got something where the question can be amended or where there could be nominations from the floor, you need to have somebody available to revise or replace that poll in essentially real time so that the corrected version can be posted.
Yeah.
I mean, that may or may not happen, but it is something that you better keep in the back of your mind to be available to do in real time.
It's obviously not the perfect, the perfect solution, but it's the Zoom solution, I guess.
Yeah, we all have to admit that this is not the way that we want to hold congregational meetings. Pastor Bond, you had a question.
Yes, thank you. Just two things. First of all, did the announcement for this particular meeting that we're in right now, did it just go out today, or has this been out there for some time?
It went out last week in the e-news on Wednesday.
Okay, thank you. Well, that's my fault for missing it in the e-news.
Yeah,
I see there's a
not
button
a,
that says,
yeah, not a fault. It just, we set it up very quickly.
okay,
Very quickly.
I see that it's being recorded. Are we able to access this after this meeting so that we can share it with others in our congregation?
Yes, we will make sure that it goes out. I think we were planning on doing it next Wednesday in the e-news, but do we need it soon? Marilyn, maybe you can speak to that.
I can get it posted probably late tomorrow
On the, we can
on the
do it.
website.
On,
On the
yeah,
website,
let's
sure.
put it on the website. Good. Yeah, so it'll be on the website.
Okay.
On our COVID resource page.
Okay.
If
All
you
right.
look in the chat, you'll see the COVID resource page.
Yes.
Okay. Good.
Okay, thank you so very much for that. The second question I had is related to this. We also have had one meeting via Zoom, and we did allow for our members of the church who do not have computer access to use a phone number and call into the meeting so they could at least listen to the meeting and have voice vote. I'm wondering if anybody has had any experience with those people being able to vote in polling, for instance, or not. I was surprised to find out that there are phone button features like *6 that enable you to mute yourself and unmute yourself. I don't know if there are any other features that would enable them to participate in the vote.
I cannot comment on the current version of Zoom because it's been updated a couple of times this year. I can tell you that when the question first started to get discussed at the synod level with some of the conference calls and Zoom meetings that were going on among synod people in the spring, that at that time Zoom polling did not allow for phone connections to do polling, and therefore Zoom was not authorized by the ELCA to be used for synod assemblies. That's one of the reasons that although we had a Zoom meeting, we did all the voting through the voting app at the synod assembly, which, by the way, is still a preferred method because it has 100% verification, which takes one other issue out of it. I'm not going to say that the current Zoom meeting doesn't have that, but that's certainly a consideration in terms of how you set up and who you may have to recognize under some circumstances you exclude.
Okay, and that app that was used at the Synod Assembly for voting, is it my understanding that there was quite a cost to that, that the average congregation probably would not be able to afford that?
There are two.
Marilyn's popping in there.
Well, go ahead, John, and then I know there is a free version. It has a number, a capacity limit, but it's it might be enough for small congregations.
Yeah, very small congregations. I think the free version is only like 10 or 12 people. There is one version that's $25 plus, I don't know, 50 cents. The version that we used for the Senate Assembly was $1.50 per person per day for 370 people.
Okay.
That doesn't
And-
sound cost prohibitive.
No, it does not. Could we also have that posted up with this information on the website as to where we go to either download or subscribe to that app?
It would be a subscription with Turning Technologies. I'm sure we can get you the contact information.
Marilyn just put it up right now. Thank you, Marilyn.
Administrative assistant extraordinaire.
Amen.
We could probably shorten that to just turningtechnologies.com. I don't know why we got that whole query straight.
That's a whole lot of,
That's a whole lot of nothing.
yeah, good.
Thank you.
Pastor Richard, you're
Yeah.
welcome, Pastor Bond. Pastor Richardson, you had a question.
I'm not a pastor. I'm the president of council at Bethesda on the Bay in Bay Village.
Great. Well, welcome, Mr. Richardson.
Well, thank you. Just a quick question about voting. Notwithstanding the polling app and the voting app that was just discussed by Mr. Bond, is there a problem with just simply raising hands, showing hands on the screen?
Maybe.
I'm trying to keep it simple.
Yeah. Well, the reason I said maybe is that Robert's rules presumes that you have a right to privacy in voting. And this is one of those that depends on your congregation and how strict or how laid back they are about disclosing that information. As Pastor Knierim said, in their congregation, it was an issue because people didn't want their votes on the budget to be indicated. So there again, it varies. That also, by the way, going back, one thing that you do have to recognize with something like the polling app that we used at Senate Assembly is that downloads that information to a file that then has to be read and reviewed. You get the base statistics, but the backup file is there and available until you wipe it out. That does indicate who voted how. So if we had wanted to, if you're a conspiracy theorist, Tim Barrage, who is on this call, or Marilyn Mativia, or Sue Rothmeyer, or Sonny Gilroy, or I, or Dave Anderson, or Jonathan Stuft could have gone through and mined all of that data until we completed the vote and wiped it out. So again, everything has trade-offs.
I understand. Thank you.
Pastor Jesse, you've got your hand up again. I'm so glad
Yes, I
you
do.
came. We would be so quiet without you.
The first question is for John Sleesman. Why would you volunteer that information that you just volunteered? That's really a question you don't have to answer.
Because I was explicitly asked about it by one Synod Council member, and therefore it is out there and known to some people. And
Having known you for over 20 years, that question never entered my mind.
Well, believe me, it does. When we first went to the electronic voting devices that we used at Synod assemblies, that was a question that half a dozen people asked immediately.
My second question for Pastor Knierim again, not being familiar with the polling feature of Zoom, is that where you type in the question? Do you approve the budget? Yes or no?
Yes, it is.
Okay, thank you.
I think it'll become pretty obvious to you, Dwayne, when you just pop up the polling feature. It's pretty straightforward.
I think one of the best pieces of advice I heard tonight is to rehearse.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
Are there other questions?
I have one. And I will file this under the only dumb question is the one that you didn't ask. Someone mentioned the possibility of people being able to dial up just for the audio portion of Zoom. When we get the information for our Zoom meetings, they give phone numbers, and no one has ever known what those phone numbers for. It says find your local number, and then it has a link to click on. Would that possibly be a way that people who don't have a computer could get on a phone by using whatever's on that link?
Correct.
Yes, except what's on that link is the list of phone numbers that are actually in the invitation just below that, plus other phone numbers in various places from London to Sydney to Cape Town. All of the US numbers are on there. Now, if you have a cell phone or a voice over internet protocol phone, that's not a problem because you're not paying long distance charges. There is no local number in Cleveland or Akron or any area here. So if you have a old traditional landline, that could result in long distance charges. As Pastor Angela Freeman Riley pointed out this morning at the first meeting, however, there is another option, which is that for a relatively low cost, you can rent a temporary 800 number that people that were local and didn't have a computer could use. Again, recognize you're going to be in the problem there, particularly if somebody has an old-fashioned landline and a dial-up phone. They can't use those codes to raise their hands or to mute themselves or unmute themselves. So those are issues that you're going to have to deal with as you figure out how to connect them up.
Okay. One thing I have.
Oh, go right ahead.
One thing I found interesting, my wife and I also belong to a fraternal organization that's trying to figure out how they can have an annual convention online. And what we seem to be finding out both in our congregation and in this fraternal group is that people kind of at both ends of the spectrum seem to be the ones that are least likely to have a computer and are more likely just to have a cell phone. So the youngest people don't have computers and a lot of the older ones don't. So we have a fairly high percentage of people that are using a phone, a cell phone. And so some of these features are kind of hard to find on the cell phone. You know, when you're talking like, well, where is the raise hand and that kind of thing on the little phone screen, it can be kind of tricky to find where these things are.
Yeah. So I, while we were talking, I made a poll. So while we were talking, I did this, and now I'm going to launch it. And here's the poll. And so you can see somebody has to say a monkey could have done this because it's just too funny. Somebody has to answer that. So it's really easy, even in the midst of your meeting. So if somebody comes in, you know, and has a new motion, you can even create, oh, thank you for the monkey. I appreciate that. That even as that comes, you can create on the fly.
Where did you go to do that? Did you go back to the Zoom US to do that?
All right, so the poll is, I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to show you where I did that.
You do have to be a host or a co-host to do this?
Yes, you absolutely have to have, the hosting capabilities. All right, so here's my screen. I'm going to close down our poll here. Our poll is ended. And here are the results. Thank you, everybody. I'm glad a monkey could have done it. So when you're on Zoom, let me go back to, nope. Let me go back to my, so here's my meeting. Why can't I get back to my, oh, I didn't do this right. Hi, everyone, I'm back. Un moment, por favor, you're being very, see, this is where a monkey could have done it better than what I'm doing. Okay, so when, why does it keep going there? Here we are. I'm looking at the COVID status. We don't want to look at the COVID status. I want to look, I may not be able to do this.
Oh, yeah, the problem is you're the host. You can't share your Zoom screen.
Yeah, never mind. I can't do that. So we just learned something very important. I can't show you that. When you're the host, there's a poll at the bottom, and what it does, I think Mr. Goldsworth, I think it was you who asked me, does it send you to the zoom.us? In fact, it does. It sends you straight to the zoom.us, but it sends you exactly where you need to go. And as Marilyn just commented, Zoom has good tutorials on it. But having a practice meeting would also be a great way for you to work through that. Sorry that I just did monkey work there. Pastor Jesse, you still have your hand up. Does that mean you have another question?
It does.
Go for it.
Can you work out all those questions beforehand?
Yes.
I mean, like you can agendize your entire meeting digitally so that you just pull things up as they're ready to be voted on?
Yes.
Yeah, and
Cool.
I think Chuck would encourage that.
Yes.
Don't try and do it on the fly like I did.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, even if it's for something where you could have a nomination from the floor or an amendment, prepare your screens so that you can then only have to adjust them if something comes up. Tim is on here actually, and he's the one that gets stuck with doing this at Senate assemblies every time somebody makes a nomination from the floor. And as he can tell you, all of those screens are all pre-prepared. It's just a matter of doing the manipulation, because having to type them in when you need them is problematic.
Yeah. We are at 8 minutes after the hour. Do you know if there are reading materials available to keep as notes to scribble on, or just training? Oh,
I'll look while we're doing the wrap up here.
thank you.
There are some written materials from Zoom. There's also an awful lot of, third-party stuff out there, Zoom for Dummies and all the assorted, commercial market.
Zoom for bishops. So now we are getting very close to 10 after 8. Does anybody else have any questions? Do my 3 compatriots have any last? All right. We want to say to you that as you start thinking about this more or getting closer, and if you come across any concerns, please email. I forget, who did I put under the gun this morning? Who did I
Marilyn and
say?
me.
Was it you?
Me for constitutional parliamentary questions.
I divided it up, right? So
Yeah,
if you have constitutional parliamentarian sorts of questions, please contact John Sleesman. If you have legal questions that nobody can, then by all means, please contact Marilyn, and she'll pass those on to me, and I'll make sure that that I speak with somebody legal or get you in touch with someone. If you have any other concerns or anything, just contact the Synod office, please, please, please. We do not want you to think that you have to invent the wheel. There are lots of people that have done this, and we can connect you with people who have or help you out. That we just don't want you to be all out there on your own or think you're on your own. So please reach out to us. Please ask the questions that you need to. I appreciate your time this evening. I appreciate your presence here. And, you know, for those of you who are on the roster, you kind of have to be here because you know, you're kind of in charge, but you lay people that are here trying to figure this out, good on you. Thank you very much for loving your church enough to take an hour and 15 minutes with a monkey bishop to find out how to do these things. I'm thankful for your part in God's kingdom work. I think that's enough. Yes. I don't know about you. I need a beer. I think I'm going to have one. Just one. The Lord be with you.
and also with you.
Let us pray. Most glorious and gracious God, thank you for the good-naturedness of this crowd, for their thoughtful questions, for their passion, for their willingness to learn new things and to find ways to continue to do your work in this weird, strange world that we are currently inhabiting. Grant us a restful night so that we might rise again in the morning to serve you. All of this we pray in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
A special thanks to Marilyn and volunteer John, and for volunteer Pastor Canarum. Thank you very much, especially to those volunteers, and Marilyn for working late tonight. Everybody have a great, fantastic evening, and go get them. You got this. You can do it. I know you can. Have a great evening, everyone.